plate with Maren and Nate, the first week of Big Ten softball in the books. And along with Maren Angus Combs, the softball writer for Hale Varsity, my name is Nate Rohr. I'm the play-by-play voice of Nebraska softball. A good week for the Big Red. They go 3-0 at home against Purdue after a comeback win last Tuesday against Iowa State. And so the Huskers come through the first weekend of Big Ten play undefeated. Got some surprises out of what happened in Big Ten play. And Maren, I think we'll start there. What caught your eye the most about what we saw in the first weekend of the Big Ten?
Oh my gosh, Indiana. Like
Hmm.
wow. There are no words, but I can try to find some. Okay. Indiana swept Maryland, and honestly, it wasn't even close. There were a couple games that I
Mm-hmm.
just saw the score and I was blown away. I thought Indiana had s- uh easier schedule coming into that matchup compared to Maryland, and Maryland being ranked the majority of the first part of this season. I thought for sure it was gonna be the Terps winning that series and ending the winning streak of the Hoosiers, but I was definitely wrong, and Indiana has extended their winning streak to 15 games.
Yeah, the Hoosiers with a walk-off victory on Saturday, 2-1, and then they play a doubleheader Sunday and thrash Maryland 15-7, and then in the nightcap, 11-4. And you and I were talking about Indiana last week, and specifically how they had not really asserted. They had been on a winning streak, but they hadn't really beaten anybody during that streak, and we weren't sure what to make of Indiana. I think this announces their presence with some authority in the Big Ten. Maybe not to win the Big Ten necessarily, but certainly it's going to be in the thick of the Big Ten race and maybe even a regional candidate. But Indiana's on a roll right now. That was kind of where it started for me, too. Iowa with the series win over Penn State was pretty surprising to me because I have liked Penn State's pitching staff the entire
Mhm.
year, and they were not able to keep down an Iowa offense that's been a little hit or miss this year. So that was a surprise. But at the top of the ticket in the Big Ten, not surprising, Northwestern sweeps Minnesota at
Right.
home, and Nebraska sweeps Purdue at home. Maybe a little surprising that both those teams were able to get the sweeps in those series, especially Northwestern getting the sweep of Minnesota and then playing pretty well. But not surprising, I don't think, that Northwestern was able to win that series. And the last couple of weeks, Northwestern's asserted themselves as the team to beat in the Big Ten, and kind of the position everyone had coming into the year. But if there was any doubt about that, the last 2 weeks have served notice that that in fact is the case.
I definitely agree with that. Wasn't expecting a Northwestern sweep of Minnesota. I thought maybe they would win the series 2-1. I thought Minnesota had been playing well enough to win at least one game in that series, but the other surprise to me in the Big Ten was Rutgers sweeping Illinois. And
Oh,
I think
yes.
Illinois is a team that Nate, you've been pretty high on, and I think both of us have been pretty low on Rutgers. Kind of the same feel as Indiana, right? Not playing a lot of competitive games, a lot of teams in postseason running, and I was I was impressed by Rutgers with their sweep of Illinois.
Just a huge offensive weekend for the Scarlet Knights, 10 runs in the victory on Sunday. And I'm with you. I have said throughout the year that Illinois is going to be one of those teams, maybe not in that top tier of the Big Ten, but in that second tier of teams that are solid regional contenders and probably getting into regionals. It's time to take another look at Rutgers because, as you said, they had played a pretty easy non-conference schedule. They had the one weekend, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where they went down to Gainesville. They played Florida, and then they played the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. and they didn't win either of those games. Florida dominated them. And so that kind of verified, well, Rutgers is a good team. They piled up wins against some easier competition. Maybe they're not a team we need to take seriously in the Big Ten. Maybe not, because they go out to Illinois and sweep them. And Illinois has been steady, consistent. Maybe they came in stumbling a little bit. They lost the 2 games to Mizzou last week, and so maybe they were a little out of sorts. But the fact of the matter is, Rutgers went to Urbana, and so no, it's not a fluke. It's not one crumb day. They went out there. They hit the ball like crazy, as I said, 10 runs on Sunday. They got 7 on Saturday in the game that got suspended Friday to Saturday. 7 runs, 8 runs, 10 runs
Yeah.
in the 3 games. So 25 runs in a 3-game series. So 8-run game. That's notable. That is a lineup that I like a lot. The leadoff hitter, Sand, has been somebody who's been one of the top in the Big Ten really throughout the year. Lynn Cavage, the third baseman, has also been somebody who's been pretty consistent for Rutgers. So I feel like the Scarlet Knights, I undervalued them. And they announced to me, hey, we are a team that's going to be in the running, perhaps to make a regional. I'd look at their RPI ranking to see where they are, because that is the one thing. In playing an easy schedule, you can build some confidence, but you also kind of dig yourself an RPI hole. And
Right.
though the Big Ten schedule will help you climb out of that, you're not going to climb very quickly, and you can really put yourself in a hole if you've taken the easy road in non-con. This isn't the SEC where you can win your way through SEC into regionals. All that said, though, impressive weekend by Rutgers as they swept Illinois. Of course, we focus on the Huskers here, and it's taken us a little while to get to the Big Red, but I thought a very good weekend for the Huskers against Purdue. 3 pretty different games, especially different Friday to Saturday. They win a shootout 9-7. The strike zone was minuscule on Friday night. Neither pitching staff really could find it with much consistency. But Sarah Harness comes out of the bullpen, throws 4 shutout innings, and then the offense hangs around, does enough. And Brooke Andrews, another clutch home run. She had 2 bottom of the 6th inning, 3-run home runs to give Nebraska the lead. And so Brooke was very important in the Huskers' efforts last week, and able to come through in the clutch twice, which is pretty notable for a player to do.
Yeah, and Brooke is having a career year right now. I just wanna point
Mm-hmm.
that out because right now her numbers are they've flown past her career highs already, and we're still in March. So if we take a look, I'm going to bring up her stats right now so that we can talk about what Brooke is doing exactly. But these home runs, I know Rhonda talked after the game against Iowa State about Brooke and how sometimes she can be a stronger hitter than Billy. And I think for some of us, we were like, wait, what? Because we've been talking about Billy Andrews and how great of a hitter she is for so long, but Brooke has entered this lineup and just taken it by storm. She has 28 RBIs, 6 home runs, 6 doubles, 29 hits, 20 runs scored, and 89 at bats, and she's hitting 326. So, in comparison to last year, which these were her career high numbers, 5 home runs, 16 RBIs, 6 doubles, 27 hits. So, sh she's here. Brooke Andrews has arrived, and to have
Uh,
2 of those Andrews sisters in the lineup doing damage is scary.
Yeah, they're similar players in a lot of respects in that they both have the power aspect to their game. As mentioned, 6 home runs for Brooke Andrews, or 5 home
Mm.
runs for Brooke. Um, they can both hit for power, Billy and Brooke. They're tremendously athletic. They can run. They can use the short game to their advantage. They're both assets defensively. I mean, Brooke has been very, very solid in center field for Nebraska. And you feel like that's kind of an underrated strength, the Huskers. The fact that they have such an athletic outfield that can cover so much ground. I mean, for a left fielder, Abby Squire is really a plus player. And then in center field, Brooke Andrews has great speed, and Caitlin Neal is very good in right with a tremendous arm. So you feel like defensively, Nebraska is set in the outfield. And you're right. You know, Brooke has been overshadowed in her career by Billy. She got off to a slower start in her career than Billy, and maybe that's why there's always been a tendency to undersell what she can do for a team. But it's pretty impressive. Brooke has come into her own this year. It's also interesting, you know, Brooke is the older of the two. They're both listed as juniors, but Brooke is a year older. But it's just interesting, you know, Billy came to Nebraska and was an immediate big impact player. Brooke was somebody that was in the lineup, somebody who was there, got a decent amount of playing time, but wasn't somebody who was just dominating. Uh, and she's really come into her own this year. And I don't, you know, usually the older kid's the one that shows up right away and makes the big impact. But in this case, Brooks really stepped it up this year. It's been impressive to see. And then you top it all off with being able to come through in the clutch twice. And that's just so tough for a hitter to slow the game down, to stay within themselves, and yet to still come up with two big hits against two big conference foes in back-to-back games. I mean, just incredible out of Brooke Andrews this past week.
Yeah, and
So, the,
her
go ahead.
2 home runs, her 2 home runs were identical situations, right? Nebraska's down a run, there's 2 on, and we're in the bottom of the 6th inning, and in both of those at bats, Brooke wasn't really close. So, especially the Purdue at bat, she fanned on 2 pitches that were outside, maybe a little off the plate, and I'm thinking, "Oh, no," because if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Just go right back out and have her
Mhm.
chased. And they threw a pitch up and in, and she made him pay, but kind of the same thing in that Iowa State game when she hit her home run in that game as well, you know, those just struggling all game to really barrel up a ball, and then a mistake is made, and she's just crushing those mistakes.
Yeah, Brooke, in both those at bats, and I thought it was interesting. And Matty Fowler, my broadcast partner on the Husker broadcast, pointed this out. You know, early in those at bats, Brooke seemed very much out of sorts. Didn't really have a good feel for the pitcher, but she kept fighting, and it felt like she gained a little more confidence. The foul balls were getting stronger. She just seemed to have a better feel for the pitcher, so she was gaining information and confidence with each at bat. And then, of course, eventually comes through with the big hit both times. One other big note out of the Friday game was a terrific pitching performance from Sarah Harden, and we've been waiting for her to kind of find her way back. I think the Kaylin Kinney injury put a ton of pressure on and really forced her step into the spotlight and be aware that she was in the spotlight and this team was going to need her, and there wasn't a whole lot behind her. And yet she comes out of the bullpen in a game where Courtney Wallace was having a lot of trouble finding the strike zone and throws 4 shutout innings, doesn't walk anybody in until the 7th. And the 7th inning was a little bumpy on Friday night, but allows just 2 hits, 2 walks, and strikes out 4 and slows down a Purdue offense that had been humming along to that point. That buys some time for Brooke Andrews to come through with her big hit. You know, Sarah had just been fighting it so hard over the last few weeks. And for her to come out with a good outing, Nebraska needed that and needed it badly.
Yeah, it was really good to see Harness step up because Courtney Wallace may be the ace of the staff, but she can't do it alone. And you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
the injury to Kenny has just really hurt this pitching staff, but she had a good weekend. I was happy to see her performance overall, and because she did make another appearance, and I just felt like that was kind of the Sarah Harness from earlier in the season that we've been waiting to see again. And she's not someone that's of like not familiar with the spotlight, right? She carried Southern Illinois, right? She was an ace. She was a first
Mm-hmm.
team all conference player. And so she's been in this position, maybe not in a power 5 position, but she has led in the circle, and maybe it's just taking a little bit longer to adjust. New coaches, new philosophy, different pitch calling. I don't know, but it was nice to see her come through for the Huskers this weekend.
She's coming off an injury which really slowed her toward the end at Southern Illinois, and that's complicated her time with Nebraska as she spent most of the fall just working back from that injury. And it felt like she had come back from that at the beginning of this season. But again, with the injury to Kinney, uh, it put a little more pressure on her. You also have the situation where, uh, it's one thing to be mentally sharp and perfect in the right space, body and mind right out of the gate. Second week of February, you've practiced, you've been able to work in measured situations, in controlled situations, and be in a place where you can uh, be at your absolute best and also just know what your workload's going to be and have controlled it for a while. But as you get deeper into the season, by the end of the season, everybody's a little sore, everybody's a little nicked, everybody's a little off. And you think about Nebraska's early schedule, and it's the plight of every northern team, the fact that you have to travel for 6 weeks and all the hassles that come with it, being in an airport for 4 hours a trip, the long flights, and just that, along with preparing to compete, you're not going to be as sharp week 3, week 4, or it's very difficult. And so you wonder if the usual wear and tear plus the added pressure of the Kinney injury was weighing on Sarah's mind and really hindering her performance.
Right.
So that
And they're
that is the book on that. Go ahead.
and in those preseason tournaments, they're playing 5 games at a time, plus maybe it they're not sleeping in their own bed, they're not eating
Hmm.
food at home. There's a lot of things that go into that, and so by the time that you're done with that preseason schedule, you're like, "Okay, now I can relax a little bit." So maybe, opening up at home, right? They hadn't even played at home yet, right? Until Iowa State. These were
Hmm.
their first 4 home games of the season. That can change. You're comfortable, you're sleeping in your own bed, you're doing your thing, and that it may sound little, but that also can do a lot for an athlete.
Sure. And the little differences make big differences in competition. So the Huskers win Friday 9-7 in a shootout. Saturday, more of a pitcher's duel. And we mentioned Courtney was not sharp on Friday night. She was on Saturday, especially early on. Pitched 6 shutout innings to begin the game. Uh, in fact, 6 1-hit innings to begin the game. In the 7th inning, she allows a 1-out home run to Jade Moy, who had gotten 3 pretty good swings against Wallace, but she was the only one for Purdue, and then gets a double play to end the game. But it was good to see. I mean, Courtney's been good, but she's not been even at her best lately after the Kinney injury and just with everything going on. But she razor sharp on Saturday, and the Huskers are going to need that if they're going to go anywhere this year.
Yeah, and that home run by Moy against Wallace, that was the only base runner that got past first base that game. So not only was
Mm-hmm.
Wallace on, but so was her defense, right? Because she didn't have a lot of strikeouts, but her defense made the plays when they needed to.
Yeah, and that's what Wallace is going to have to do. She is not a big strikeout pitcher. She'll get you a few, but she's not somebody that you run out there and expect her to strike out 10, expect her to strike out 8 every start. It's just not who she is as a pitcher. And so Wallace pitches well. The Husker offense was a little hit or miss on Saturday, but they did come up. They got plenty of help in the 4-run 5th inning, 2 walks, a catcher's interference, setting the stage for Felder, Gray, and Kaneda to come up with RBI hits in a row. And so they win 4-1 on Saturday. And then Sunday, Huskers come to the ballpark and the field is encircled with snow, which, I mean, hey, life in the Big Ten, that you're going to have a conference game and you show up to the ballpark and it's snowy, you know. But so tough conditions to play in. You're trying to get a sweep. I was impressed by Nebraska's focus because you worry when the conditions are a little adverse. When you've already won the first 2 games, I think it's easy to kind of cut the motor a little bit and say, okay, we've got 2, and so it's a pretty good weekend. And Nebraska stayed with it. Sarah Harness got the start. She wasn't as sharp in the start as she was in relief on Friday, but didn't really give up a whole lot, just the 1 run. And then again, Courtney Wallace came out of the bullpen, and this is going to be her life, I think, this year, where she's starting 2 and coming out of the bullpen for 1 in Big Ten play.
Yeah, at least for now. I think that the doubleheader against Iowa, that's gonna happen. Same thing this weekend against Michigan. It's gonna be pitch by committee with the 2 of them, and just seeing how it works, right? One of them's gonna start, the other's gonna come
Mm-hmm.
in relief unless the other team's just not hitting. Um, eh, I don't know how long that's sustainable though, right? Courtney has
Mm-hmm.
thrown over 100 innings already. That's a lot. And you've got Harness who is just over 60 innings. There's a big difference right there. So it's easier said than done, right? It's hard to face a team 3 times through a lineup. Now we're going into a 3-game series. How many times are these batters going to face Courtney Wallace? And at what point have they seen her enough to know what she's gonna throw?
Yeah, the Sunday game where they're seeing her 7th time, 8th time. They've had 2 days of film, 2 days of live at bats, or at least a day of live at bats. That's a pretty big hurdle, and so I'm encouraged by what I saw from Sarah Harness this past week, as far as coming out of the bullpen and pitching well Friday night, and then a decent start Sunday.
Mhm.
But they're gonna need a little more from her. It's gonna have to be to the point where she can basically pitch a game by herself and win it. The one piece of good news on that front is after this week, after the Iowa Michigan week, Nebraska plays 3 games a week basically the rest of the year. They've got the midweek game against Creighton later in April, but otherwise it's 3 games a week. And so you are talking about only needing to get through 21 innings. And that, between Harness and Wallace, and then hopefully you're able to get Kendall Mengel an inning here, an inning there. And then hopefully at the end of the year, you get Kinney back and she's able to be effective. You're hopeful that there's enough gas in the tank. I trust that Courtney's done everything she can do to be in a good position physically and mentally, that she's doing everything she can to recover. I know this coaching staff is watching very closely her workload, the fact that she's probably not pitching a lot in the bullpens during the week. I mean, I'm sure it's very focused, a lot of fine tuning, but for the most part, she's just got to go out and compete. And for her, I'm sure there's also the factor that, look, this is my 5th year. This is my last dance. I'm throwing probably the last competitive pitches of my life. And so she can put everything into it. It's the old thing of you don't. This is it. You don't need to leave anything, uh, hold anything back because it's your last chance. And so for her, I'm sure she's giving it everything she can. And her being a captain and really the leader of the team, the captain of captains, right now, both in terms of vocal leadership and in terms of play. Uh, they're going to get Courtney's best, and you feel like that's enough for this team to be competitive in the Big Ten and get to a regional, and then from there, we'll see.
They're sitting in a good position right now, I to get into the postseason. They're 32nd in RPI right now, which I don't see that really dropping, unless they just absolutely fall apart. But because the teams that they have coming up, Michigan at 22, Indiana climbing
Mhm.
at 41, uh, Iowa 65. That seems a little low, but they're playing teams with a higher RPI. Northwestern's an 11, so that I don't envision them falling out of postseason contention. They're gonna finish the season over 500. They're gonna get into the tournament. We know
Mhm.
that. It's just a matter of where. I don't see them hosting a regional. They're not
Right.
in position for that to happen, but it's a matter of where. Is it Norman, Stillwater, maybe even Arkansas? Um, maybe that's
Yeah.
there those are the 3 spots that I think we're looking at, and at that point, is it a 2 seed or a 3 seed?
Yeah, and I think right now they are sitting in a place where they can be a 2 seed. As you mentioned, 32 in the RPI. They control their own fate, and that's all you can ask for. And they were able to play a pretty tough non-conference schedule, stack some chips as far as the RPI is concerned. Um, and as long as they keep going out and taking care of business, winning series in the Big Ten Conference, they'll be in regionals. Like you said, 32 in the RPI, that's solidly in. If you're sitting, 40 is kind of the rule of thumb, vague, probably, you're sitting there thinking you're in, but you're not sure you're in. And 30 wins is sort of that benchmark as well. Well, this team's sitting at 23-9, just 1 week into Big Ten play. So there's plenty of time to get to 30 wins and hopefully over. As you look at the rest of this Big Ten schedule, I don't know that you can count on this team sweeping a Big Ten series the rest of the way. I think they're going to be favored. It's not like there's a Las Vegas line on this, but if you were just going through, you would favor them in maybe all but one series. The one exception, of course, the trip up to Northwestern. I think everything else you would sit there and pretty well expect Nebraska to win 2 out of 3. Ohio State's probably the closest one not to that. And Wisconsin is one where you would maybe expect them to win 2 of 3, but wouldn't be surprised if they won only one. But you just feel like this team has done enough to this point to position themselves well for regionals, like you said.
Yeah, and, with Michigan coming in, Michigan's not the same team that we're used to, and I think that was proven over the weekend when they lost this series to Ohio State. That's not something that we've seen a lot of in
Mhm.
the past, is Michigan not just losing a conference series, but losing the conference opening series, and doing it
Right.
on the road, and it especially after Michigan had such a great news week, right? So,
Yeah.
they announced the renaming of the stadium in honor of Carol Hutchins, which is awesome. She has done so much for this sport and for that program. Uh, you just thought that momentum maybe would carry on into the weekend, and it did in one game. The first game, they got the win, they hung on, but then after that, the floodgates opened.
Yeah, Ohio State. So they were only able to play 2 games of that series, and Michigan won in extras. Game 1, game 2, Ohio State thrashed Michigan 11-2. I'm glad you brought up the Wolverines, because I thought it was good for them to go down to Columbus and capture a win. It was a sold out atmosphere, so I'm sure it was a hostile atmosphere, but you're right on Michigan in that everything we to this point this year is that they've taken a step back, and that was further proven uh, against Ohio State, losing that series all the way they did. You don't you can see Michigan losing to Ohio State, like we said, rivalry game, all that stuff, but you don't see them getting blown out like that very often, and they did. And so there are some questions as to where that season's going to go. I also wonder with Michigan, we're talking about what our team's chances for regionals and where they are. Michigan RPI is in pretty good shape, but they're sitting there with double-digit losses now, and again they come this weekend. Illinois. They have later series against Northwestern, Indiana, and Minnesota. I just have to wonder as those losses mount and they're sitting on the bubble and they're looking at their RPI and they're seeing teams hop over them, does the pressure get to them a little bit? They've got a long NCAA regional streak to maintain. We saw this somewhat last year with Arizona in that it just seemed like the pressure of holding on to that streak under a first-year coach got to them. And once Arizona got into regionals and got into postseason, the pressure was off and they were dangerous and they made it to the Women's College World Series, which is not to say that's what Michigan's going to do. But I just think there's a ton of pressure on Michigan right now, and I don't know that they have the horses to overcome it.
Yeah, in my head, I had, well, look what Arizona did, right? Arizona struggled all season, and all of a sudden they get into the tournament and take off all the way to Oklahoma City. And I think there is something that we've learned over the years is that there is consideration for the name, right? The
Sure.
legacy of the program, and when it comes to postseason, and if Michigan is sitting in an RPI position that's favorable, and also maybe a 500 record or above, I think they're still
Mm-hmm.
gonna get in because it's Michigan. And,
Right.
you look at where they've ended up in Lexington a lot over the last few years, and I would see them going back to Lexington.
Yeah, this is not to bury Michigan's regional chances yet, but I think it's worth flipping on uh, the alert signal to say, hey, Michigan's got some work to do if they're going to make it into regionals. We mentioned how they end Big Ten play. The middle portion of that schedule at Michigan State, they play a single game. They play the series against Illinois, and as we mentioned, they were vulnerable this week. And then they go to Purdue for 3, and then they have the single game at home against Michigan State. And maybe that's where the Wolverines can build some confidence and get things rolling to where they can do some damage in the back half of the schedule and play themselves in the regions. Back on Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, and we're chatting with Husker infielder, outfielder, and now power hitter, Brooke Andrews, and just an explosion of home runs this year. Brooke. What's gotten into you? Where does this power hitting come from?
I think just what we're doing in practice, and I'm really just focusing on my swing this year, and, whatever happens, but the home runs have just been coming a lot more often this year, so, I'm not complaining, but...
Was it something you were trying to do this year, hit for a little more power, put in more work in the weight room? Was there anything in particular that stands out about how you prepared for this year?
I don't think anything in particular. I just kind of been wanting to focus more on being more a consistent hitter, and the home runs, like I said, they just keep coming, but I just have been doing the same things that I've been doing like in practice. Nothing changed, but I don't know.
How has your game developed? You're in your fourth year with the Huskers after a great career at Gretna. How has your game developed here at the college level from when you showed up at Nebraska to now?
I've definitely gotten a lot more experience from freshman year, and playing in a lot of games against a lot of good teams, and even my teammates playing with them, they're good too. So just being able to experience a whole lot of situations have helped me become the player I am today. So
you've been able to kind of be a part of this program's rebuild. You were a part of a couple of losing teams at the early part of your career, and then the 2021 team that went 500, and then, of course, last year's great run to second in the Big Ten regular season, the Big Ten tournament championship. How have you seen this program kind of rebuild itself from the struggles that you saw early on in your Husker career when it seemed to be a little more difficult in terms of wins and losses?
I think we're just all coming together as a team, and our end goal is to win and just have fun. So I think that's a big part of what our culture is and what we're trying to build here. And we really do try to pick each other up whenever we can, and be one unit together, so that helps us play better on the field. So we connect off the field to help us perform better on the field.
Speaking of connections, of course, you are playing with your sister, Billie Andrews, and you joined the team first, and then Billie followed. What's it been like experiencing college softball with your sister, and also being the older sister, kind of leading her through it?
I think it's an experience that anyone would be grateful to have, because we did play together in high school, and it was such a blessing. And then now in college, being able to continue playing with her for another 4 or 5 years, I guess. But it's really just an honor, and something I'm really grateful to have, because she is my sister, and we just kind of have that bond, and we get each other softball wise too. So it's just really nice and such a cool thing to experience.
You've even had some reps this year where she's been at short and you've been playing third base. Is there kind of an unspoken communication between you guys as far as I've got it, you take it, range, how you set up, anything like that?
Yeah, we definitely know each other's ranges just from how much we played with each other. But I guess some people would say we have twin telepathy sometimes, because of the way we read balls, or so I don't know, but it's just cool to have. And some things are just unexplainable, with reading plays and stuff. So yeah.
Chatting with Brooke Andrews here on Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, and you've been so versatile for this team. You've played some second, some third, you've played outfield. Where do you feel most comfortable defensively, or is there a most comfortable place for you?
Honestly, wherever I'm playing is where I'm most comfortable. And I might not moving to a certain spot after I've been at one for so long, but I eventually get comfortable there, and that spot that I'm playing at that moment is the one I love the most. So it's really, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but.
Do you feel like you've had to put in extra work as far as being prepared to play middle infield, third base, corner outfield, center field?
I feel infield you have to have more, just be more ready for it, because you are consistently going to get ground balls, and your arm has to stay loose, whereas in the outfield you don't have to keep your arm as loose is because you're not going to get as many balls. But I work pretty hard at both of them, so yeah.
You mentioned playing with your sister and having that bond and that connection throughout your career. Is there also a sort of competition between you guys? Are you guys kind of measuring yourself against the other to see who's making a greater impact or who's doing more?
I feel like we kind of just build off each other. We don't really like look at our stats like specifically and like see who's doing better, because like we both are doing the best we can, and like that just builds off of each other. But like I know she has like more home runs than me, like she always has, but like I don't let that bother me, because like I'm grateful that she's doing the things she's doing and like the same for her towards me. So it's just like cool to like see what we're doing and like congratulating each other on our successes.
So it's success for the team, and it's your sister succeeding, which is a lot of fun. When did you guys know that softball was going to be kind of your avenue, and that you were above average softball players that maybe could go beyond high school?
I think it was during high school when we like got our new like head coach, because like he made the game fun for us, and like we could just like see where we could go after, I guess. I don't know.
Sure. About 2/3 of the way through the season, believe it or not. What goals do you have for yourself over the final third of the season? You still have plenty of conference play, of course, to go. What do you have as far as goals for yourself for the rest of the year and goals for this team?
I think for myself, just continuing to be a consistent hitter and like making quick adjustments within the game to like keep seeing those pitches and like getting base hits and like scoring runs for my team. And then I think like defensively, just going hard after every ball, like in my range, because like I got like a big range in the outfield, so just being able to cover anything I can to like get those outs for our pitchers.
You've made your mark as a clutch hitter in this last week, especially on that homestand 2 6th-inning go-ahead home runs. What are the keys for you as far as coming through in those clutch situations?
You know, I think everyone wants to like be in those situations, so like you always have to be ready. But I think for me, it's just like focusing on my breath and like taking it pitch by pitch and like knowing what my plan is against the pitcher, like not changing anything. Because like it's just the same pitcher. It's just like a more important moment in the game, I guess. So you just kind of like have to keep doing the same things, knowing what you're doing, and like really I just focus on my breath and like making sure I'm taking that. So.
And finally, what's been your favorite part of this year? What's kind of the moment or two that stuck out to you as this year's gone on?
Well, I would say definitely those clutch hits, home runs, especially because it was like the same situation, same inning, you know. So that was like a really cool thing, because that's like never happened before. So that was really cool. But I think just as a team, like we're just figuring out how to play together and like stringing things together, and like we really have like a good bond between everyone. So it's just really fun to like play for each other and with each other on and off the field.
It'll be fun to see where that bond and where that vibe takes you guys. Good luck the rest of the way, Brooke.
Thank you.
Husker outfielder and sometimes infielder Brooke Andrews joining us on Behind the Plate. Well, we've talked quite a bit about what went on last week in the Big Ten. Let's get to it. The Big Ten Power Rankings. Maren, you release them weekly on Varsity.com, and let's hear your top 4. I'm going to guess there's some shuffling after the action of last week.
Shuffling is an understatement. It's going to sound wild, so hang on. Northwestern stays at number 1. Okay.
Whoa.
Shocker.
Yep.
I know. I have Indiana at number 2. And
okay, now we're getting wild.
Right? Because last week they were number 11. I know. However, that 3-game sweep they just had pushed them into the top 25. That's the D1 top 25. But it's still they're still in they're ranked they're a ranked team now. So I moved them to number 2. Nebraska stays at number 3. I felt like sweeping Purdue was what they should have done. So I don't think they get promoted for meeting the expectation. And then number 4 is Ohio State. I had them at number 6 originally last week.
Okay, so gotcha. My top 4, of course, Northwestern still won. I've been high on the Cats all year. That continues. They did nothing against Minnesota to dispel what I thought about them. So Northwestern stays number 1. They're at Iowa this weekend, so I suspect that they will continue to build momentum, and I suspect they're going to be here next week at number 1. Quite frankly, they're the odds-on favorite in the Big Ten. I pushed the Huskers to 2. I had them at 5, and maybe I was too much of a prisoner of recency bias last week, because I was really shook up about that law of Kansas and disappointed by it. So I dropped them. But while, yes, I expected Nebraska to sweep Purdue, the teams that I had around Nebraska didn't quite hold serve. And so I felt like Nebraska had a really good week. I don't think I'm making too much of a homer pick here, but I'll have the Huskers at number 2. Number 3, Ohio State. They hold from where they were. Splitting with Michigan is good, not great, but they also weren't able to play 3 games. I am reasonably confident if they played a third game, Ohio State would have won it. But at the same time, we don't know that. So I'll keep them at 3, and we'll keep an eye on them moving forward. I dropped Maryland to 4, and that's only thoughts from last week. I know, I'm giving them a lot of credit for what they did in non-con. If they don't turn things around here soon, then maybe they'll have the precipitous drop. They have Michigan State at home this week. That's a chance to get right. So if they don't win that series, look for the Terps to drop. But at this point, I'm not willing to take the Indiana series sweep as gospel as to where Maryland is. I'm willing to chalk that up to one bad week, but if it's followed up with another disappointing week, then that's an indication of where they're going. So that's my top 4. All right, Maren, can you round out your top half for us, please?
I can. Okay, but first I have some news because Ohio State and Michigan ended up playing a third game on Monday.
On Monday. Okay, so you
Surprise!
got me. All right.
So Ohio State did win 8-7, and it marked the first time in 33 years that Ohio State won a series against Michigan. So we'll let that sink in for a second, and then I will continue now with my power rankings. All right, I dropped Maryland down to 5. I have been really high on Maryland all year, and I just was very disappointed in the performance over the weekend. It just didn't look like the Maryland team that I had been watching, so I dropped them down to 5. I have Iowa at 6. That moves them up 2 spots from their number 8 spot I had them in, and I felt like beating Penn State on the road was huge for them. And number 7 is Minnesota. I know they played Northwestern. However, I just felt like it wasn't as competitive of a series as I would have liked to have seen. So they're down at 7. Wisconsin drops from 5 to 8. You cannot lose a game to Michigan State and expect to stay in the same position that you were in the week before. I don't care who you are. Congrats to Sparty. Congrats to you for winning a game. But Wisconsin, man, You almost lost the series to Michigan State. Like, that's that's not
Sure.
something that should even be a topic of discussion right now. It should have been a 3-game sweep.
Mm.
So, Wisconsin, you dropped down to 8. There's my rant.
Okay, so I wasn't as harsh on Wisconsin. Maybe I'm being too nice to Wisconsin,
I think maybe
but
you
some
are.
of this is yeah. I'm keeping them at, or I bumped them a spot to 5. Now some of this is just kind of what happened ahead of them, and the fact that a few teams ahead of them lost. So I bumped them up to 5. I dropped Minnesota down 2 to 6. Like you, I was a little disappointed that the Gophers didn't fight a little harder, didn't put up a little better fight against Northwestern. Uh, yeah, I expected Northwestern to win that series, maybe sweep it, but I expected the games to be a little closer. Number 7 is Indiana, and I bumped them up 3 spots for what they did against Maryland, and that's probably not enough credit. I've been a little slow to buy into the Hoosiers, and perhaps that's to my shame. But that sweep of Maryland caught my eye, and certainly leads me to believe that that winning streak that they were on in non-conference play is something they're going to be able to back up in the league. So I've got Indiana at 7, and maybe that's a stock to buy into right now. The Hoosiers this week have a doubleheader against Purdue in West Lafayette, and then they've got a nice 3-game series home against Ohio State, and that'll be a nice heat check on where Indiana is, because Ohio State's good, and they're a team that we expect to get to regionals. But if you are indeed a team that can go to regionals out of the Big Ten as Indiana, series at home, that ought to be a series you win. So it'll be a nice check on where IU is this week against Ohio State. Michigan, I bump up 1 spot to 8, and again, maybe I'm just it's name brand bias. Maybe it's just holding on to the stock a little too long. Um, at Ohio State is good. As you said, first time in 33 years that Michigan falls in the series to Ohio State, and you know, so very often when you have streaks like that, um, one program is significantly worse than the other. One program's going to regionals and one isn't. Well, Ohio State's usually a regional program. Michigan's a better program historically, but Ohio State's usually a good program. And if you're going to regionals most years, you would think one of those years you would beat them in a series. You just fall into 2 games to 1 series win, and the fact that they hadn't until this year is pretty notable. So, but I've got Michigan at 8. They come to Lincoln this week. Um, you know, I'm Michigan's at 8, and I'm not so sure that the arrow isn't downward for them, though they do get a game at Michigan State after the Huskers, so maybe things can turn around there.
I
All
have
right,
Michigan
that
at
is.
9.
Go ahead. Okay.
So, I'm not far off from you, and I did bump them up a
Hmm.
spot. So, the week before I had them at 10, and so are we a little down on Michigan? I don't know. I don't think so. I think they're right where they need to be right now. Well, I mean, we're not that far off from each other on where we have them. So
Sure.
have I have Michigan at 9. I dropped Penn State to 10. I know that uh, losing a series to Iowa, should they have dropped down to 10? I don't know, but I did have them at 7 the week before. So maybe, maybe not, but that's where they're at. Rutgers, I'm still not convinced. So I have them at 11 and Illinois at 12. And I moved Sparty up from 14
Okay.
to 13. And then Purdue is taking us home down at 14.
Okay. So old Sparty is out of the cellar. Good for you, MSU. I've got Rutgers at 9. Um, I liked what they did this past week at Illinois. Like I said, it caught my eye. It made me believe that, hey, maybe there was some more juice to what they did in the non-conference than initially thought. But I got Rutgers at 9 with the idea that we'll see if they stay there. Illinois, I dropped from 7 to 10. You can't get swept at home. Just flat out cannot get swept at home. And especially after the week before, I was a little disappointed with what the Illini did. I've got Iowa at 11. They go to Penn State. They win that series. I've still been really slow to buy into the Hawkeyes. We get a look at them this week. The Huskers get a look at them this week. And we can reevaluate after that. Maybe next week I'm singing an entirely different tune. I've got them at 11. State, I've been blue and white all year, banging the drum for them because I love their pitching staff. They let me down flat out. You got to win your home conference series, especially against Iowa. So Penn State, I dropped from 8 to 12. I've still got Purdue at 13. I'm not quite convinced that Michigan State is better than Purdue, despite the fact that they won a Big Ten game. But we'll see. Purdue's got a couple of bats. The pitching staff doesn't do a whole lot for me. Michigan State's sitting there at 14. We'll see if they stay 14 or if they bump to 13. But yeah, Purdue and Michigan State right now are my bottom two, and they're going to have to do some work to climb out of those 13 and 14 spots. So those are our Big Ten power rankings, and that'll wrap up our look at Big Ten softball on Behind the Plate and Maren and Nate. We thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you listening. Make sure you subscribe and download every week. We'll be back next week to review the Huskers series against the Michigan Wolverines, also the doubleheader against Iowa, and everything going on in the world of college softball. For Maren Angus Combs, I'm Nate Rohr. Thanks for listening.